Hello and welcome back to Black Bear Atheist. Today we're taking on part two of the video by Jubilee, which one atheist versus 25 questions, Alexa Corner versus 25 questions. The first part was up to 30 minutes and then I stopped it. This is the second part. I'm gonna also do 30 minutes and then I'm gonna stop it and then do part three. We stopped it last time while this guy is trying to defend genocide. That's literally what he's trying to do, defend genocide. And you shall see when as he continues to defend genocide. Let's get into it.
Everyone who's left, who is it that they're killing? It's the women, it's the children. We're then told that 12,000 people fell that day, all the people of Ai, and it says 12,000 men and women. So we know that women who were non-combatants were also killed. Even if there's hyperbolic language being used here, we know that we're being told that specifically 12,000 people died, including non-combatant women.
Okay, so I think, for example, in 1 Samuel 15, these are ancient texts. It's literature, so we don't go over and above how interpreting literature works. So even though the text can be saying this is what God said, well, it's still in a literary form.
Do you think God said that? Do you think it's accurate?
Well, I mean, I wasn't there. I didn't hear it. I think that the Old
Also, the text is saying God said it, but it's not from God. So how do we know if anything is from God? How are you even a believer if you're seeing it as what it is, a religious text? Which means it's not always going to be right. So how are you even a believer to begin with if you see the text as a religious text? Meaning it could be right or it could be wrong. And if God didn't tell them to do it, so they did it by themselves, then what? They were delusional the entire way. They were never God's people. Like, how does that work?
Testament scripture is inspired, and I think that it doesn't fail in its representation of revealing God. For example, we talked about in the New Testament, right? John chapter 2, he puts the temple expulsion moment at the beginning of his gospel. Do I think that John is actually concerned with the chronology there? No, I don't think that. I think it's a literary tool.
Sure.
And I think the Bible is full of that. They're literary texts, and they're assembled in a certain way. So I don't think that necessarily that means that God was the one using the hyperbole, but that the scribe recording the events and sort of summarizing what happened says, okay, so God commands to attack the Amalekites. But does that mean that God is the one who did the hyperbolizing? I don't think.
Do you think it would be problematic? You mentioned the cleansing of the temple, and you said that even though the chronology is off, the point is recorded. If we had a story of the cleansing of the temple, if we discovered some early manuscripts, some version of John, where Jesus goes into the temple, he starts cleansing the temple, flipping over tables, and then he starts beating up children, just starts punching them because he's so angry, right? What would you think of that? You'd probably think either it didn't happen, or if you could prove that it did happen, that Jesus was less moral than you thought he was, or if for some reason people believe that that's what he did, I think it'd be a problem for you. And I think that if you're looking at a good God here, the fact that even this is reported as something that he said, and this is part of the Jewish tradition that basically nobody disputes is at least theologically accurate.
Right, but you've yet to demonstrate children being killed in the Old Testament.
Yep.
You haven't actually shown that. So yes, I would find that to be problematic, but you haven't shown innocent children being killed in the
We
Old
know
Testament.
that there's the command to kill children.
Right, but we just talked through all of that.
So you think God was hyperbolizing?
I think
by
the
telling
scribe
people
is
to kill
hyperbolizing. I
innocent-
think the scribe is hyperbolizing God's.
So the people that God inspired to write the book are hyperbolizing. So are they hyperbolizing Jesus' resurrection? He didn't really rose up. They just felt his presence. Is that also hyperbole? But it didn't happen. They just wrote it down, not as literal, but as like a song, like Song of Psalm or some shit. Like they didn't actually believe in the Genesis creation story. They just wrote it down as an hyperbole of what could have happened. Like what? It's such a fucking stupid excuse.
Command.
Okay, fine. So you think that the scribe has inaccurately recorded the command of God, therefore the Old Testament is unreliable.
Right. So that's not the same thing, though. I'm not saying the scribe made something up. I'm saying the scribe has a command.
So where did they get that command from?
From God, delivered through a prophet. So,
but did God say to the prophet Samuel, "Leave alive nothing that breathes, kill every man and woman"?
I don't necessarily know that I would think that.
Okay, because if he did,
then why would Saul be punished? That doesn't make any sense. I'll let Stocky.
Then we've got the command to kill innocent children. If he didn't, then we've got a problem of the accuracy of the Old Testament.
No, I don't agree with that at all. Like I said, it's literature.
I actually hope that woman doesn't speak. Again, in the first video I pointed out, she was in a Jubilee I don't know why they always bring back people. They should never do that. There's millions of people in the world. There's billions of people in the world. If you want to even say United States, there's millions of people in the US that you can bring to a Jubilee. We do not need to see the same faces over again. It was one liberal versus 20 Republican, I believe. And she was just terrible. And I just hope she never talks. Let's keep going.
Right? So God can say something, and then the recording of the event can employ literary devices like hyperbole, which what I think is happening. I want to go to Jericho and what you're talking about there, because you talked about that a lot more. I think, for example, like with Jericho, we have all the reason to believe that Jericho is a military stronghold.
Okay. Does that justify? Do you think there are children in Jericho? Because the story depicts a prostitute there, so and our family. So I'm guessing their families in Jericho, and they will all be dead because the wall just fell. Like, but I'm pretty sure they could have actually gone around the Jericho because they circled Jericho. So it was unnecessary to. This is why it's a fucking genocide. It's not you. You don't even have the excuse that this is for war. Because they went around Jericho 7 times, or what I remember time they did, dancing around it. They could have went around Jericho. They did not need Jericho to fall.
I think that's the case. I think that's historically accurate. And so when we're not like just looking at Israel going in.
Historically accurate would be to consider the fact that Jericho actually, I don't know, at that time the walls were already down. The Israelites, Joshua never conquered Jericho. The depiction of dancing around Jericho 7 times or however many times they did and singing hallelujah, that's not even true. That's the historical accurate.
And just sort of like
Yeah. So
killing
I've heard this
for
too.
no reason, right? It's a military conquest.
What else can you consider killing with no reason when you could have gone around Jericho to get to the promised land?
I think you'd be hard pressed to find a single nation in all of human history that was founded without violence.
I agree.
I don't. Right.
Totally,
That's
yeah.
never happened. I understand why you would say
Yeah.
it's problematic that God is instructing that,
Yeah.
which I get.
Yeah, but a conquest doesn't require you to kill every single person in there. When that happens, we consider that barbaric. And when a divine loving God orders it, I you start to question whether that God is loving. I believe this is all still part of the entire point. Is this God loving? Did God command genocide? Why would a loving God do such thing? And just because it's a military conquest doesn't change the fact that it's a fucking genocide.
God would not instruct that. I mean, my country is thought of as beginning in 1066 with the Norman invasion, right? And it may be, I can imagine there was some report that said that, the king was shouting, kill them and then go and kill their wives and then go and kill their children, show no mercy. I can totally see someone saying that and them not being taken literally. But if God says that, this is still part of the eternal scripture of God that people have in their pews, that's in the hotel rooms. I don't know so much anymore in secular America. If you open it up to a random page,
Yes,
especially
it's still there.
given the undertones of what's happening in the world right now.
But honestly, I'm not if I'm going to be completely honest, I think in the book of Genesis, when God leads Abraham to the promised land, he says to them, I'll bring you back here in several generations when the Amorite sin is filled up. Like that language when the bucket is all the way filled.
Yeah, so that's sinful.
Overturned.
And who the fuck told God to do that? Why would God take his people out of the land? according to the story. That gets people out of the land for 400 years, have people inhabit the land generations after generations, just to bring back his people to kill them all? You think that make any logical sense?
Sinful people.
Right. So I understand why that can be problematic, but
Well, I'll tell you why it's
when I read the
problematic.
text, I believe that God is allowed to judge people, being that He created everything, and He's allowed to use human beings to do that, and
Including the killing of
including
children.
sinful human
Okay,
beings.
pause. You've been voted out by the majority.
As soon as they said something like it actually wasn't genocide, it should have been voted out. Let's see who the next person is going to be. Please don't be the woman.
Please
Good to
return
meet you.
your
That's good.
seat.
Oh,
All right.
finally, some clashing. Like, this might sound terrible, but like I've seen, I don't think this works. Jubilee has to change this. One, the running already like is already rushing up your adrenaline, so you can't even like speak properly. Like it's just it's. I don't know, let's keep going.
Really quick, before we begin the discussion, I'm going to give you this gift and also use my point for the topic of genocide.
Okay.
Because you're saying that God commands genocide, correct? So you're making this God sound like a very hating God that like
Not necessarily
commands
hateful, just genocidal.
like genocidal. Okay. So here's this personal gift I would like to give to you. It says, cast your anxieties because he cares for you. The way how you're portraying this God when you say that very broad statement of God commanding genocide, I disagree, because in the beginning of the Bible, God is love. At the end of the Bible, God is love. Our fellow peer, he stated that our God is a very just God. So can we argue that or say that even though this God perhaps like in the beginning of the Old Testament, that's where the genocide occurs a lot. We can also say that
So do you think genocide does occur?
if it did say that in the Bible, I just want to say that like these people also went to heaven. It's not like they're getting like killed and punished in that moment. He's also taking these souls of the women and children.
No, they're going to hell. I mean, they were killed because of their sin, and I don't think any rituals were performed on them, or they were baptized with the Holy Ghost to go to heaven. No, these people were not righteous people. They were killed because they were not righteous people. That was the entire fucking point. So how in the world can you come back and say, wow, they're all going to heaven? And look at the interesting bullshit. She's also saying the same random shit that the last guy was saying, but the flags are already up. You make that whatever you want to make it.
And taking them with him if that's the case. But the whole argument is about God like
Okay, I have a question then. Do you think it's okay to kill people because they'll eventually just go to heaven anyway after you kill them?
it's not about killing, it's just like
Are people who get abortions doing their unborn children a favor by killing them in the womb, therefore giving them a fast track to heaven?
this is a different approach to genocide, but I just want to say like
I don't think you get to inflict a genocide and then sort of just make up for it with the fact that you send them to heaven afterwards. I mean, maybe you do, but the problem is that the Israelites are also sinful people. And when the Israelites are sinful, they get the prophet of God with literal stone tablets telling them how to correct their path. The Canaanites are sinful people, and when they're sinful people, they get the Israelites coming in and wiping them out of
but
their own
our
land.
God is a just God, and I feel like
One get genocide and one get multiple trials. Month and month of free trials, while one doesn't even get a free trial, you have to pay 1,000 each month. I know that doesn't make sense. I'm trying to like, you get what I mean.
even
that's
though
what I'm
if they're
critiquing. That's what I'm
if they're
critiquing.
sinful
All
people, they
right,
have
pause. You've been voted out.
I didn't. Oh my god. Let's see what the next person is gonna be. Nice to know you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
dear chair.
Hello. Hi, Alex. Nice to meet you. So you pointed at several passages, but the prophets through and through condemn Israel in much harsher terms. And in fact, God dispersed them in much.
They were not wiped out. They were not commanded. Like they were not all killed. And maybe a few of them escape because humans always find a way to, survive, repopulate. It's literally our thing. Maybe a few of them do escape. But the commandment wasn't to wipe them all out. Maybe they even were punished by God in sending them into slavery, which is kind of weird, but they still were not killed. They were given a chance of redemption, and they were still given an opportunity to come back to the Lord.
Much greater judgments
Yeah.
because they were, and in fact, in Ezekiel it says that because you were supposed to be the light of the world, you are judged all the more strictly and are more responsible. So God was just with Israel, and in fact, he placed more of a burden and a mantle and a responsibility on them and judged them for it than he did the nations. And case in point, what's already brought up was the number of generations that passed before the Amalekites were judged and the Canaanites were judged.
Yeah.
But we can come back to that point.
Okay, but can I ask you then?
Yes.
How do you define genocide?
Right. If I may, I actually have a question I wanted to ask you first.
I think it's important to know what we're talking about.
I
Here,
understand.
Right? What is a
Okay.
genocide?
Based on the word genome, obviously etymologically, we understand that you're taking it as a tribal seed line, which is fair. I
Yeah, it could be
understand that.
tribe,
Sure.
religion,
Sure.
ethnicity,
So I can
race.
understand
And we're
that.
talking about the destruction or attempted destruction
But here's
or,
the problem.
or
Here's the problem.
expulsion
Right.
of people based on those
So
characteristics.
here's the problem. Genocide, the way it's, especially the way it's used today, it implies that it's based on the race.
Mm-hmm.
And that is
Jeez. It doesn't matter what people imply to be, it doesn't change the definition. It doesn't change, like, if people said abortion is genocide, that's just stupid because that's not the definition of genocide. It's still, it could be a nation, it could be a tribe, it could be race, it could be religion, a group of people unjustly killed, or they don't even need to be killed. They don't all need to be killed. They intend to eradicate the entire group by starting with one. That's still to be considered genocide. There's no limits on whether it's one person or the entire nation.
categorically against the command of God to conquer the Canaanites. It had nothing to do with their race. It had to do with their sin. And in fact, this is
So you know that when Amalek is attacked,
right.
Israel first warns another tribe that they're coming.
Yes.
And says, get out of here, because you were good to us when we came out of Egypt.
Right.
Amalek battled them when they came out of Egypt.
Yes.
He says to this other tribe, you guys get out of here. They warn them, right?
Right.
They don't say, hey, you get to stay here. They say, you've got to go,
Yeah.
but we're going to warn you first that we don't totally destroy you.
That's right.
In
Yeah.
other words,
Absolutely.
it does seem to be, I mean, why is it that Israel are going into this land? The nation, why are they going into this land? Because it was the land promised to them by God. Why does it need to be cleansed? Because there are people in that land
Deuteronomy
who
chapter
aren't
7.
supposed to be there.
Deuteronomy chapter 7, chapter 9, he says, do not think that it is because of your righteousness or because of anything that has to do with you that I brought you into this land, but it was because of the sins of the nations that I gave it to you. This is Deuteronomy chapter 9. So it's not because he promised them based on some sort of ethnic requisite. In fact, the whole premise behind
Again, they were both sinful. And I'm going to stop pausing it and let him talk as stupidness. But if both sides are sinful, as one side used to punish the other when they're both sinning.
the destruction was the prototype of Sodom and Gomorrah.
So then a question which I
Or
think I'll-
deuterotype, because Noah was
a
first.
question which I think I know the answer to then. Do you think there was not one sort of good person?
No, exactly, and that's the point.
Right. And if that's
Right.
the case,
So-
but
so
then can I
that's
ask
why
you,
I brought up Sodom.
let me ask you a second question.
Well, hold on, let me answer your question a little bit more fully.
Were there any good people in Israel, in the nation of Israel?
Right, so let me answer your question
Because if
one by
the
one.
answer is that there were bad people in Israel
Okay,
too,
so this goes back
why
to
is it that they don't get killed as well?
The slaughter of the children
If it's not about
the
nation.
slaughter of the children has the same problem because it has to do with innocence. Okay, so let me address that problem.
Nobody's innocent, but my specific question
No,
is...
but you're saying the children in the land of Canaan are innocent and they're being slaughtered.
No, I'm not. That's not what I'm saying right now.
You said that
what I'm
earlier.
saying is that I retracted the word innocent because
Okay.
I know it can be a bit tricky.
Okay.
But what I'm saying specifically here is that if the reason why Canaan is destroyed is because they're immoral, there's all kinds of immorality happening within the Israelite nation. Hold on.
Yes.
Happening within the Israelite nation as well. If it's not about nation, if it's not about tribe, then why is it that Israel aren't told to kill the immoral people in their tribe, but only people in the other tribe?
No, they are. And in fact, that's what they do. And in fact, that entire generation that was promised the promised land died out without seeing the promised land.
I always said died out. Like, God didn't just kill them. Like, how do you died out in 40 years? You don't die out. God killed them. All of them. No one that came out of Egypt, based on what I've read, I believe I'm right here. No one that came out of Egypt except for Caleb and Joshua get to even see close to the promised land. And also the entire weird stupidity, like, oh, it wasn't because they were promised the land, it was because the people on the land were sinful. That doesn't make any sense. They call it a promised land for a reason. If that was the reason, God would have brought them out sooner. What is each generation continually killing themselves? Like, what were their sins? And this dumb fucking idea that God needs to use someone else to do his work, when we've seen evidence of God with Sodom and Gomorrah just sending down fire, with the flood just wiping them all out. You do not need humans to do your fucking filthy crimes. Stop making dumb excuses for genocide.
Because of their sin.
But not at the hands of the Israelites.
Okay, fine.
Right?
But
the Israelites are not told to expunge their own nation of the sinful people by killing them.
Let me give you an
and killing their
Let me give you a
children
thought
and
experiment.
killing their animals.
Sure.
Why kill the animals?
Let me give you a thought. Yeah, perfect. I'll give you a thought experiment. Let's suppose that tomorrow we find out that the pedophilia rings, that conspiracy theory is somehow true. Like, just imagine, like, V for Vendetta style. Like, imagine, like, hackers just broadcast everything that was going on, all the blackmail tapes, the Diddy files, the Epstein, whatever. Okay, you get the point. So you have this sudden revelation of this grand conspiracy, and it's on a scale that no one ever imagined. Okay, would you say that there is justice in bringing those people? Obviously, no one would disagree. In fact, the public opinion on execution might change at that point, and even the guillotine might come back. Who knows?
Right. But I wouldn't kill their children.
No, right. Okay, so I'm getting there. So we'll get there step by step. Let's start with the men and the women. So let's suppose in this example, the conspiracy theory is true, and everybody finds out, and then everybody agrees that the men and the women that were involved in this pedophilia ring, let's say, need to be judged. Okay, no, someone has to do it. We have no problem executing them. We have the benefit of the technology.
There are people on death row. Okay, that takes time. And I'm pretty sure the state actually has to pay for this shit. That's why most people are just getting life sentence, not death row. But like, there are better ways than wiping them out. But let's see where it's going there, because Alex also pointed out, like, we're not killing their children. But what, are the children's also pedophile? Like, Jesus.
That gives us a bit of indirectness. But if you didn't have that, you would have to either do it yourself or have your executioner
But
do
we're
it.
talking here about military execution of non-combatants, which is a war crime.
Right. So no, it's a war crime according to, yeah. But let me,
Okay,
but
pause.
besides-
You've been voted out by the majority.
Thank goodness. Jeez.
Listen.
It's great to see you.
Let's hear it.
One more time. Well, okay. One thing, when it comes to exegesis and actually trying to understand what Scripture's saying, I feel like we're playing an impossible game right now. One of my friends, Elijah, is bringing up these great points about how there's intermarriage, talked about, not to do that. After we're driving out people from the land.
So crucially on that point,
Sure.
it says totally destroy them. Do not intermarry with them.
Yes.
Do not. And I can totally. People say, well, why would they be told not to intermarry if they were told to destroy them? Because you can imagine that there's a bunch of people who want to invade a land and take their daughters as wives. And God says, no, destroy them completely. Don't marry them. Don't interbreed with them. Don't take them as captives. Kill them all entirely. This is not inconsistent with the command of Herem, of utter destruction.
My point
And
is,
also, Alex sort of pointed out, like, there were also other examples where they were commanded that they, given the option, that they could take the young females as their wives. So, that is also possible as a command. Kill everybody else except for the woman that you want to take in as a wife. But in this case, the orders could be specific and say, no, don't take anybody, just kill every one of them.
Is though we're playing an impossible game because we're reading this, or at least we're talking about it right now, like modern readers and not like ancient readers. I mean, it's almost like if somebody were to pull out the book of Revelation right now and say, hey, look, the Bible says that he's going to pull people from all four corners of the earth. That must mean that the earth, I mean, I would just be going, that's not exactly how we interpret scripture.
Yeah, that could actually mean that the people that wrote it believe that the earth is flat. That is how we try to find out what these people believe. We don't believe now that they're... Oh, jeez. Okay. People with brain don't believe now that the earth is flat and it has four corners, but people then could actually believe this stuff. I don't think the knowledge was wide and everybody was able to have the access to the information, but there were many people back then that still believe in a flat earth, which we could see in texts like this. That is how we try to understand ancient texts. So how in the world, like we're not saying that, like, I'm not even sure what he's trying to get at, but good thing he doesn't even have time to get in because it's just stupid.
All right, that's time. I'm sorry.
Really?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, man. I'm sorry we didn't have more time.
you're
Sorry, man.
Thank you.
My next claim is that there is insufficient evidence to believe in the resurrection. Okay.
Nice to meet you.
How's it going?
This is a really interdisciplinary question for the resurrection of Jesus. And in my experience, it kind of boils down into two categories. The prior probability of the resurrection of Jesus and the data itself.
So what I'm really interested in is the historical case for the resurrection of Jesus.
Okay, I want to ask a clarifying question because I would love to talk about the data. But if I were to give you a model...
Which data? I guess we shall get there. If they didn't vote him out, I actually want them not to vote this guy out. The first time speaking, which fucking data is he talking about?
of the Gospels that I would call like the historical reportage model, which would say something along the lines of the authors of the Gospels were close to the times and places of the historical Jesus. They rooted their historical work in eyewitness testimony and did not feel the freedom to make up historical facts. Because of that, we can extract all the testimonies from these Gospels, and we have access to what the original eyewitnesses actually said and did.
Okay, so who do you think are the eyewitnesses that...
That seems extremely flawed. So because the people were close to the time, we do not think they will be able to embed the information, considering the fact that they were not eyewitness? No, we don't think so. I don't agree with that.
the testimony is being based on?
So this is where I'm not a walking encyclopedia, but I would say if you looked at all the testimonies, we have 21 unique testimonies that are going to be polymodal in nature. They're going to have semblances of independence and interdependence and some dependence because of the synoptic problem, all that stuff. If we were to get there, would that be enough for you to say the probability that the resurrection happened relative to any other countering theory is higher?
No, I don't think so.
So that tells me then that, one, it could be the prior probability still. That's an issue. Because if that's not enough evidence...
It's not that. I think that the authors of the Gospels, specifically on the resurrection, can't be trusted to be giving an accurate account of what happened.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking if we had this historical reportage model, and that was true.
Sure, well, if it were true that they were reporting historical events, then it would be a historical event, yeah.
So let me clarify
I don't think that they are.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from. Let me clarify one thing here. The historical reportage model does not entail what the reporting actually happened. All I'm saying is that we can extract from there is that these were the actual eyewitness testimonies to the risen Jesus.
Okay, so I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think that Jesus is the only person, outside of the people that Jesus and the apostles rose from the dead, do you think that he's the only person in human history that's risen from the dead?
Yes.
Okay, so Matthew's gospel...
There's no way you said yes to that. Like, you just said you're not a walking encyclopedia, Jesus Christ. Okay, I'm gonna stop trying to pronounce it. You're not a walking Google. So, saying yes, jeez, Christians.
In Matthew chapter 27, says that at the time of the death of Jesus, the graves of Jerusalem opened, and the holy ones got out of their graves, and then, interestingly says, then after the resurrection, appeared to many. Many of them walked around appearing to many. Do you think that that happened?
So I would just say that if the historical reportage model is true, then yes.
So you think...
But, hold on, the problem there is those are also talking about resuscitations most likely, not resurrections.
Yeah, but what we're talking about here is the graves of Jerusalem opening and many people getting out of their graves, walking around Jerusalem and appearing to many people.
If I say yes, what's at stake there?
If this happened, this would be the most extraordinary event that's ever happened in human history. And yet...
And then you're going to make an argument from silence from there.
Some arguments from silence do work. It is not reported...
I understand that, but then that's only one piece of evidence that you're going to use.
It's not reported anywhere else. It's not reported in any of the other Gospels.
I understand.
It's not in Josephus. It's not in Acts.
So that's one data
It's not
point.
anywhere.
Let's just... Well,
but hold on, let me finish this thought, because this is important. Most Christian scholars, I think, so people like Dale Allison, for example, believe that this didn't actually happen.
Well, I'm not interested in what Allison's going to say.
The door that this opens...
What I'm interested in is what the data says. If we have the historical reportage model, right?
But you keep saying we have this model.
That's fine. Let me give you some evidence for the historical reportage model.
Sure.
If this model is true, one of the things I would expect to see would be things like undesigned coincidences within the Gospels.
Yeah.
Tiny little interlocking details.
For the sake of time, I understand what you're saying. So I think that a lot in the Gospels is historically reliable and a lot is not. Things like undesigned coincidences
are
really
you taking a pericope by pericope approach to this, or what methodology?
I'm taking a story by story. I don't think that the graves...
I don't think that's a good methodology.
I don't think that the graves of Jerusalem were opened. I don't think that there were people walking around the city of Jerusalem. But if that's the case, then that means that at least the author of Matthew is willing to invent...
I mean, what's the best way to take on this entire thing? Like, you have to take it case by case. Do you think Jesus rose from the dead? Most likely not. Considering that would be like, I don't know, contradict everything that we have ever known. Do you think the miracles actually happened? No. But do I think people actually believe the miracles happened? And people back then could believe that Jesus was actually doing miracles? Probably, yeah. Like, there are people today that believe miracles could happen. There are people probably back then that is even worse, and they believe in a bunch of superstition. Like, that could actually happen. And that makes sense. Like, you could see that being a possibility. As you say, Jesus actually rose from the dead. You need more than just, I don't know, not even eyewitness account. You need more than that to be conclusive and say, like, wow, Jesus actually rose from the dead. That's just my opinion on this. If it's enough for people that didn't actually witness the event to write about it and be like, you believe it, then suit yourself. But you don't sit at the table and act like you're rational. Like, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't sit at the table and act like you're being rational, because that doesn't make any sense. You're not even getting an eye account witness. You're getting not an eye account witness, people that didn't witness the event but heard it from someone and then wrote it down. Come on.
And
I don't
stories
think that's the
of
case.
resurrection in order to make a theological
You're making a big
point.
inference there, right?
Well, hold on.
Because
Okay,
I know you like to, for instance, you like to talk about the flight to Egypt, and you like to say that Matthew invented the flight to Egypt.
Luke.
No, Luke's the one that doesn't mention it. Matthew's the one that mentions it.
Sorry, Matthew.
It's okay.
Yeah,
It's okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, Matthew, and then typically the way you run this argument is Matthew invented the flight to Egypt. Luke doesn't mention it. The reason why Luke doesn't mention it is because it didn't happen. Matthew mentions it, and he tells us why, to put Jesus into prophecy. Here's a counter hypothesis.
Sure,
for this.
sure,
What if it's just the case that Matthew is not making up historical facts, and he's doing some sort of midrash? And what I mean by this is that he's looking at this historical thing that happened, the flight to Egypt, and taking this Hosea passage, which, by the way, would be a kind of a clunky passage to use if you wanted to make up a historical fact for prophecy. Because that Hosea passage is not inherently...
I think we might be getting slightly off... But I have to be allowed to speak here. Yeah. I think we're getting slightly off topic. The problem with the birth narrative story is not just that a story is being invented to fulfill prophecy, although we're told that that's why it's done. The problem is that it contradicts the other account. That
I'm totally fine with that. So if you look at the birth narratives...
The problem is that they're using different type of... It's like two people trying to come to different conclusions about different things. Like, it's weird. Like, one want to use Jesus' account for this, and the other want to use it for something else. So they draw the story up to make it make sense. One I want to say it comes from from the descendants of David, a king descendant, to prove Jesus having the authority. Which, if you think about it, that doesn't make that much sense, because we're to believe it was not even conceived by man. Like, he didn't need man's sperm for Jesus. Like, why did they even do this?
One discrepancy, and that is that
Egypt
Luke doesn't mention it.
I think
well, Luke says that they go to the temple.
What?
Luke says that they go to the temple.
Yeah,
So hold on.
I'm going to agree with you.
Let me finish it. Luke says that the family go to the temple and present Jesus in Jerusalem. Matthew says that they go to Egypt. They're very far away from each other. And we're told that they stay in Egypt until after the death of Herod. This is a contradiction.
So again, I actually agree.
Okay, pause. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Yeah, I'm not sorry. Get him out of there.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Okay, so historical case for the...
Again, it's good thing to be nice, Christians. It's a good thing to be nice. If you already went, let someone else go. It's not that hard. If you already went, let someone else go. Especially if you got utterly destroyed. Which all of them have got utterly destroyed. So let someone else go.
Well, before we get there, actually, my main contention had to do with the example that was just brought up about the flight to Egypt.
I mean, we can talk about it, but what I really want to know here is how we know that the resurrection of Jesus historically happened.
Right, okay.
So can I start with the question for you, for example? Do you believe that the graves opened and that the holy ones were walking around the city of Jerusalem, appearing to many people?
Yes.
Why is this not reported in any other Gospels, any other historical account, anywhere, given that this is the most extraordinary thing that's ever happened in human history?
Right. So the...
Also, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but also crucially, Matthew says, at the time of Jesus' death, there was a huge earthquake, the second earthquake, the graves opened, and that then the holy ones appeared to people after the resurrection to many. So there's this very, very strange passage, which seems strange on the surface, but also says that the graves opened at the time of the crucifixion, but they weren't walking around and appearing to people until after the resurrection. It seems confused, it seems contrived, unless they were like hanging out dead in open graves for like 3 days until they got up or something. It's a very, very strange passage, which I think has no historicity behind it.
Sure, but that's not the same as the claim you originally brought up, which is the resurrection of Christ himself.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to say is if that's unlikely...
So if I were to, I understand. So if I were to connect the two, what I would say is the historicity for the resurrection of Christ has the same type of data that the historicity of the resurrection of these holy ones in the end of Matthew, because the appearances of these holy ones and the appearances of Christ correlate. They correspond. And so the reports of their appearances is just as likely, like for example, you're aware of the passage in obviously Corinthians 15, which is one of the earliest attestations of the formal traditional creed that states about the resurrection of Christ and the appearance to 500, and this states within 5 years of Christ's resurrection. So
well, arguably, yeah. I mean, it's unclear. I mean, are you referencing...
As I understand, you do grant that possibility.
I grant that Paul's very early. I don't know about 5 years.
Sure. But the tradition on which it's based, because he's quoting a very specific midrashic formula.
I agree.
Okay, I can concede that.
Paul inserts...
It really doesn't matter, even if it was like right there, because we don't have the account of 500 people. And Paul was never there. He's writing this based on another account, which of itself, you're like, what is going on? So we don't have the actual original technically script. But Paul is accounting and saying this is part of the tradition that's been before me. And we did it a little bit back then when Paul was writing it. It just be like, okay, but we don't have an eyewitness account. This is just like it's just a passed down testimony, basically, of, hey, have you heard that 500 people saw Jesus rose from the dead? But like, we don't actually know these people.
Self into that formula. He says, finally, he appeared to me. So at some point, the formula stops and Paul's own words
actually, that demonstrates the proof of the formula rather than subverts it.
Sure, but I don't know where the formula ends and Paul begins.
That's fine. My point is to say that there are early attestations that are no different in nature than the attestations of the holy ones that rose from the grave. So
crucially,
so if you reject the resurrection of Christ based on the data of eyewitness testimony, then of course you're going to reject the resurrection or the resuscitation, let's say, either one of the holy ones based on the eyewitness testimony.
Well, it's fine if you believe that. I just know that a lot of Christians don't, so I'd like to establish that first. Otherwise, it's irrelevant. Let's forget about
So we did your passage. Can we do mine?
Yeah, sure. Okay. We can forget about the graves opening thing.
Sounds good. So let's go to Hosea if you don't mind. So in Hosea, you have actually a fantastic example of how the prophecies of Christ are being fulfilled at deeper, multivalent levels, right? It's a metalepsis of prophetic fulfillment. So to answer the discrepancy between Luke and Matthew, first of all, you have the time of the purification rite for the mother, It lasts 33 days after the circumcision of the infant. And therefore, it's a 40-day period before they're presented at the temple. This takes place before they flee to Egypt. Now, I understand the difficulty in the verse right after Luke's pericope about the presentation of the temple with Zechariah, because it says that they returned to Nazareth.
Yes, he says that afterwards they returned to Nazareth.
I understand.
Maybe they went to Egypt in between.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say.
Can I just say that that may be the case? I think that's an unnatural reading of the case, but I'll just grant you for a moment. Let's say that the birth narratives don't contradict each other. That's fine. Let's say that the birth narratives are not historically unreliable for that reason. Evidence of the resurrection I'm looking for right now.
Sure, I understand that.
But I get where you want to address it. But there are contradictions in the Gospels.
Okay.
Well, that's a whole nother
pause.
claim.
I'm so sorry.
yeah,
You've been
no
voted
worries.
out by the majority. Please
Thanks, man.
return
Thank
to
you,
your
appreciate
seat.
No one is actually sorry. They want him out.
Okay.
So there's one point you kind of keep going back to is the opening of the graves. And you're saying we're not seeing that anywhere in history. And I kind of agree with what Dan was saying, is this is an argument of silence. So we don't see anywhere in history the destruction of Pompeii being written down through Vesuvius. This is a huge event.
Sure.
Why don't we see that?
But if we had
Oh my goodness. So they didn't write down what happened in Pompeii. I'm not very clear about what happened, but let's say, basically what they're saying, they didn't write down what happened in Pompeii. Yeah, we're still able to find out that a volcano erupted and took down basically this entire city. So then shouldn't we be able to find something, even without eyewitness accounts, that a guy named Jesus rose from the dead? I mean, I mean, one is something that naturally happens, one is supernatural, and we can't find anything except for this terrible eyewitness accounts.
had accounts describing Pompeii around the time that happened and they just didn't mention it, you don't think that would be a bit suspect?
Well, we don't see anything talking about the destruction of Pompeii.
Sure, but if we had accounts that were written about Pompeii at the time of the destruction and they didn't mention it, do you think that would be weird?
Yeah, I do think that would be
So
a little
we have
bit odd.
accounts written about Jesus in Jerusalem at the time that this extraordinary event was supposed to take place, and they didn't even think to mention it.
So
Can I tell you why I think the story's in there?
Sure.
Because Jesus is supposed to be the firstborn of the dead. And Jesus is an apocalyptic prophet in the Synoptic Gospels, predicting that the end of the world is going to come soon, a general resurrection of the dead, and Jesus is going to be the firstborn of the dead. So I think Matthew invents this story so that these people rise from their grave, but they don't start appearing to people till after the resurrection, because Jesus is the firstborn of the dead, and this is the general resurrection. The reason it's invented is because, of course, after Jesus dies, there is no end of the world, there is no apocalypse, and so Matthew invents this story in order to fulfill that.
I think that's one hypothesis. But I think when we're looking at the Gospels, we have another hypothesis. We have this fact that, we mentioned the undesigned coincidences. You're familiar with that, right? We have the fact that they go through a lot of historical information so they get geography right. You agree
Yep.
with this?
Oh, yeah.
So would you say that we have authors that are located within this area during this time period?
I don't know if I can say that with confidence, and I think it depends on which gospel you're talking about.
Well, let's just go like the Synoptics.
The Synoptics. So who do you think is the author of, say, the Gospel of Mark?
I would say
I
it's
think
Mark.
that was John Mark, the author of...
Yeah.
Now, why do you think that?
Well, I think you're just kind of brushing off my question, though. Do you think the authors were in that time period during that, in the location?
I think even if that's the case, I think that the events were written down decades after they happened.
Okay, but we are saying...
But I'm happy to... Let's say that I granted it. Okay,
Okay.
so these accounts are at least based on eyewitness testimony. Fine. So what?
Well, if we have people who are recording true information off eyewitness testimony,
Then why does that true information often contradict itself?
in what way does it contradict itself?
What's the date of Jesus' death? The Synoptics say that it was on the Passover.
That's interesting. I mean, if this, if the information are supposedly given by people that were at least close to the eyewitness account and they were basing it on an eyewitness account, it shouldn't contradict themselves. And enough with the BS of, oh, it's just telling the story in a different perspective. Telling the story in a different perspective doesn't mean you will get the date wrong. Doesn't mean you will get the order of the event wrong. That would make no sense.
John has it before the Passover.
So there's a long, convoluted answer to that. It's how they use idioms in the language. I don't want to get into that
What
right now.
time did Jesus die?
So I don't want to
Mark
get in.
says that it's 9 in the morning. John explicitly tells us that he's still standing before Pilate at midday.
So here's the thing. I'm going to grant you contradictions. Is that not what we would expect to see from people recording real events?
Not on these matters, I think.
Why not?
Now, I've made this argument myself. It's like, okay, yeah, maybe we'd expect people to sort of misunderstand the points. But if it's clear that the reason why John is putting the death of Jesus before the Passover is to present him as the Passover lamb, then I think we have reason to suspect that it's been done on purpose. In other words, if we can explain why these contradict each other because the authors have different intentions, I think that proposes a better hypothesis as to why they contradict.
So specifically on Jesus' day, I don't have off the top of my head. I know there's an explanation for that, and maybe we could talk later and I could show it to you, but I don't have the top of my head
Okay,
for that.
when Jesus is on the cross, there are two thieves next to him, right? What do they say?
One says, one condemns him, and one says, don't condemn him.
That's what happens in the Gospel of Luke. In the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of Matthew, which are earlier, both of them mock him on the cross.
Yeah, I don't see that being an issue.
You don't see that as being an issue?
Why would that be an issue?
Because
Why would that be an issue? One was supposed to go to heaven and one was supposed to go to hell because he mocked Jesus. But in another, it contradicts that, and both of them were mocking Jesus. Are those not two separate account? Wow. Okay.
Because this is quite an important theological point that's being made. Jesus is forgiving his enemies right before his death. This seems to me, if the earlier Gospels, Mark and Matthew, say that this didn't happen, and explicitly says that the people who were on the cross next to him were mocking him, this is a story that Luke has invented.
But what is
why would Luke invent a story like that to make a theological point, which tells us that the Gospel writers are willing to invent things in order to make a theological point?
I think you're just assuming an
Okay,
invention.
pause. You've been voted out by the majority.
It's an assumption when you can show I'm not sure which one, maybe Marty or Mark, extended the generations to get to Jesus from David. I think both of them did it, but one extended the amount of generations in between. Why do they need to trace it back to Jesus? Why do they need to trace it back to David? Because based on the prophecy, the Messiah is supposed to come from the descendants of David. So they need to somehow trace it back to David, which is also stupidly and unnecessary. That's even a way to sentence that word. It's stupid because considering the fact that Jesus was not conceived by didn't need the seed of a man. Was conceived, God was the one that touched Mary and Mary became pregnant. So he didn't even have a father, like a human father. So it doesn't make sense why they would even try to do that. Or they did all that BS just to say Jesus fulfilled that prophecy. And they even specifically say in many verses, this is to fulfill this and that in the Old Testament. So it's quite important if they contradict him.
Please return to your seat.
Sorry, we don't have more time.
The resurrection, as you know, is the single most important issue in Christianity. If it doesn't happen, as Paul would say, then none of this matters. If it did happen, then everything matters and everything becomes much more important. Do you believe that the disciples of Christ, Paul as well, and others, believed that Christ rose from the dead?
I think that's probably the case.
Okay, so you believe that they truly believe, not that they just made it up.
But can I ask why you believe that they believed it?
Sure. Well, wait. I would say they believed it because it happened. That's
okay, fine. But how do you know that they actually believed it?
How do I know that they believed it?
Yeah, how do you know that they believed it? How do you know that they weren't lying, for example?
Because they were executed for it. So, for instance,
how were they executed?
Some of them were executed by being sawed in half. Some of them were executed by being beheaded.
How do you know that?
Well, through obviously the tradition and the historicity of the church.
Well, those are two things. There's tradition and there's historicity.
Well, no. So the tradition of the church, the idea is that when you say church tradition or holy tradition, it's not just this idea that, we're just saying things and making things that are in line with Christianity.
Sure.
But it's actually this idea that we are following the trail and the lineage of Christianity.
What I'm looking for is evidence of the apostles' martyrdom for their claim that Jesus had risen from the dead. Only 2 disciples' deaths are recorded in the Gospels. That's Judas, who hangs himself, or there's another contradiction. He either hangs himself in Matthew, or in the book of Acts, he's described as falling over in a field with his headlong and his guts spilling out. Right? It seems to be a difference. So Judas, also James, the brother of John, who's beheaded by Herod. We're not told precisely why. Every single other death of the apostles relies solely on church tradition. There is no historical evidence that they were martyred, and certainly not that they were martyred for their belief that Jesus was resurrected. In fact, even according to church tradition, the only person, the only disciple, the only apostle that was not martyred for his faith, do you know who it was? John, the one who makes the most theologically fantastical claims of all of the apostles.
But obviously we know that also by the tradition that they tried to kill John by boiling him in oil.
I don't see any evidence that this.
That's an interesting point. And I actually have never heard that. Because I've always usually believed like maybe I should continue reading my New Testament journey and get back to it after finishing the Book of Mormon. So I've always thought they were all persecuted right after. I mean, considering the fact that Christianity did become the religion of Rome and got popular because of the persecution. It did spread because they were persecuted and people continually spread the religion all around Rome. So you have that historical aspect of it, knowing that they were persecuted. But we don't know what happened to the apostles technically. If the Bible wasn't specifically saying this is what happened to the apostles, and this was just passed down traditions among the church, which even makes it less reliable, which is weird because the entire point is that they died for it.
This actually happened outside of church tradition, and I don't trust that church.
But so for instance, what type of evidence would you be expecting to hear by people who do not care about those Christians? So for instance, the people in power in Rome, why would they be writing some, incredible long tales about we are going to kill the Christians because of this, and this, so that we
this
can
goes both
now
ways, right? Why would the enemies report these martyrdom stories?
Right, exactly.
I could say, why wouldn't Christian writers be motivated to make such stories up? What I'm saying is that goes both ways. We don't know what actually happened. All we have is a tradition, a biased tradition that seeks to establish their martyrdom that tells us that that's what's happened.
But we can know that they wouldn't want to just make this up because some of them also were killed. And when we now track that time later, there are saints in the 200s, 300s, 400s that are killed for having this thing.
But crucially, they're not the eyewitnesses. They're not the people who supposedly saw this happen. So they could easily just be mistaken.
Agreed. But what I am saying is that if those people in the 200s, 300s, 400s are saying that the eyewitnesses were killed and they are holding to this same faith and they are willing also to be killed, do you not think that this says something?
If indeed that is what happened.
No, that doesn't say anything because if they're not even eyewitness and they just believe the word of the people that were supposedly eyewitness that were killed based on the tradition passed down to them and they died for that, that's no different from any other religion and other people dying for their religious faith, which we have seen. I thought what separated Christianity at least was that the eyewitness were so close and they died for what they believe. But if this is just traditions of the church being passed down, then even that argument becomes much more flawed. Like, if you get what I mean, it doesn't make any sense. If the eyewitness didn't actually die, or we don't know exactly what happened to them, the Bible did not count that they died. It just based that on the church traditions. Yeah, we know they were persecuted as Christians as a whole, but we don't know whether the apostles died for what they believe.
It means that they heard that the disciples died for their beliefs. That's all we can know. We don't know whether that's true. We don't know whether that's accurate.
Yes, but
by the way,
we
I'm
don't
not saying that they didn't.
Right.
I'm just saying that we don't know. In other words, I'm happy to just grant that the disciples did believe in the resurrection of Jesus and that they died for their beliefs. What I'm saying is that when people throw this out as if it's a historically attested fact, it's simply not.
So what happened on Easter morning?
I don't know.
There's only one other option other than obviously that Christ rose from the dead. I would ascertain, and you can disagree if you feel free, it would be that his disciples, people who truly loved him, stole his body and somehow disposed of it.
Well, it could have been somebody else who stole the body.
And and but what motivation would they have to steal the body and dispose of it?
Grave robbing was quite popular in that time.
But there were guards,
around that area. Well, there are guards that are only reported in Matthew. And what does Matthew say about the guards? He's the only person that reports the guards. And what do the guards do? They say that Jesus has disappeared, and the high priests pay the guards, tell people that the body's been stolen. Now, what does Matthew say? He says, and this is a rumor that they went and spread that persists to this day. So the author of Matthew knew that there were people who were saying that somebody stole the body, and intentionally puts these guards there, has this story of the high priest paying them off to spread this rumor in order to combat that rumor. So we know that people in the early church, before the writing of the Gospel of Matthew,
weren't in the impression
thought that the body was stolen. There's even, Tertullian talks about, this is amazing, Tertullian talks about a theory that some people were spreading that the gardener had stolen the body of Jesus because he didn't want people to come and spoil his lettuces when they came to see him as a shrine.
And I would agree that both seem illogical. But if we're just going to say that it was robbed, and then these disciples, this group of people, now are just not looking for the body, or that, again, which I would say is even more unlikely, that it is people someone who did not care about Christ, that now would steal his body. I feel like this would be also very illogical.
Well, there are theories that are suggesting, for example, that
believing that he resurrected from the dead would be supposedly logical? In what way? Would him rising from the dead something we would be considering supernatural, something that we literally have no evidence of ever happening, would be rational in this case? In what case would that be the alternative? Heck, we could say the the emperor of Rome came in, scooped in, and stole Jesus' body. That would still be kind of more probable than something like this happening, because we have never seen it.
the authorities, either the Jewish or the Roman authorities, didn't want this to become some kind of shrine to believers of Jesus to go to after his death, and so they disposed of the body. There are all kinds of theories. Some people think that the body was eaten by dogs. Like, there's all kinds of things that could have happened, which seem pretty spurious and unlikely. But to me, if you're trying to tell me that a man rose from the dead, you're going to have to do a lot more in the way of getting rid of these other...
It would be the only clause that has an external force. Every other clause is also extremely illogical, but the clause where Christ raised from the dead has that external force, and that external force is God.
So can you tell me why...
Pause, guys. That's time.
So the first thing I want to ask is, do you have to have evidence to prove that something's real? To believe something's real?
Broadly, I think that can't be the case, because there are all kinds of things that we believe without evidence, such as the existence of the external world and the laws of logic, fine. But when it comes to historical claims, I think that, yes, we need some burden of proof.
And how much historical claims do you need in order for you personally to believe that Jesus is real?
I believe that Jesus was real. To believe that he was resurrected is a different thing. I think I would need probably more corroborative accounts of specific appearances that didn't contradict each other.
Okay, what if I told you that Jesus still is revealing himself to people today?
That's fine, but do you think he's doing so in bodily form to multiple people at once?
Okay, so this is the thing, is I believe
Jesus. I'm just gonna do the rest of the 3 minutes that's left on the timer, and we'll stop this video here. Are you kidding me? Jesus is still showing himself to people today. Wouldn't it be very, very nice if Jesus just show up in this recording to an atheist instead of 20 Christians debating for the existence of Jesus? Wouldn't that be nice?
Jesus is still alive today, and that he is revealing himself, he's healing and delivering people. And it would be absolutely impossible for Jesus' resurrection if Christians didn't have power. So if a Christian was powerless, then Jesus wouldn't have resurrected. But because there's still deliverance, miracles, healing, signs, wonders,
And those are claims.
visions, and dreams, that's evidence, and that's living proof.
Dreams?
That Jesus resurrected, because if he didn't resurrect, he wouldn't have sent his Holy Spirit as an advocate to fill the believer to operate and to be empowered to walk in signs, wonders, and
Along with
miracles.
a wealth of other religious traditions, which also have their visionaries too. As an outsider, I have to say, I can understand as a Christian, if you hear the story that someone's seen Jesus, you might think that's plausible and think, you know, praise Christ. For me, I don't find it convincing because I see it happen all over the place. We see all kinds of visions. We see people seeing ghosts. We see people seeing Jesus. We see people saying all kinds of gods. And by the way, that also I don't think would really indicate the historicity of this particular resurrection account of Jesus of Nazareth.
I had Jesus appear to me 3 years ago. I was in my room and he appeared to me and he came and he gave me a big hug. He lifted me up. He turned me around and the joy was unlike this world. And I'm telling you, like, he's so real because I've physically seen him. But, you know, I could say all day my tangible encounters with Christ. I've seen signs, wonders, miracles. I've seen paralyzed people walk out of wheelchairs and not over time. I've prayed over people and I've seen broken bones go back into place. I've seen people delivered of demons, like the very things in the Bible.
Our body naturally heals. And you're like, but she's talking about crazy stuff. Like, our body naturally heals. And if you've seen people that, medically, there's no medical explanation for how they came back to life. Let's say the entire bones are shattered and there's no way they're gonna come back to life, like be able to walk again and stuff like that. And we're able to actually get like the medical in a video, even not even a video, a medical account of a doctor saying I treated this patient and all their bones were shattered and it was impossible for them to be able to walk again. And a pastor touched this individual, or a lot of people prayed for this individual, and overnight, the x-rays from the previous night showing shattered bones. The next day, all the bones were fixed. Not just the bones, everything about the person just magically fixed. I think a lot of people will start believing. But to say you have personally seen this with no case of evidence, no nothing. We just to believe that you saw Jesus in your room. With all due respect, I genuinely don't give a fuck.
I've seen come to life, and my life has been tangible evidence of the living God, of the living resurrection, that he has risen, because I wouldn't be able to see or do any of that stuff unless that happened. But as much as I can tell you it, right, it's up to if you want to believe it or not.
So I'm fascinated by your account. I always love to know what people see when they have these kinds of visions, the physicality, how Jesus appeared, did he fade away, did he walk out of the room, did he knock on the door, this kind of stuff. But the crucial point is that if I had such a religious experience, I have no doubt that it would probably turn me into a Christian, and God willing, it will happen one day. That would be awesome. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened yet. And as far as that goes to convincing anybody else, people will say that's not evidence, and it's not. But it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be for you. It's supposed to be the reason that you have to believe in God, and it's probably the best reason you can have for believing in God. Unfortunately, that's not going to do very much for me, because these stories of sort of demons being driven out and this kind of stuff, I think the only thing that demons seem to be more scared of than Jesus is a camera. If I can see this kind of stuff happen, maybe that would increase my credence. But until it does, I just have to accept that that's something you experienced. That like the apparent visions of the disciples and other people that you've already mentioned, I don't know what's happening there. I have to suspect it's some kind of psychological phenomenon until I'm shown otherwise.
Guys, I'm sorry.
Hey, so nice to meet you.
So much word in like 2 seconds. We're gonna stop the second video here. Yeah, it is quite interesting so far. Some of them are brought interesting things up that I've never thought would be like an argument from a Christian perspective. But it still sounds so freaking weird and stupid when you actually think about it, and we'll try to bring up the verses that they bring up. But we're gonna stop the second one here, and we're gonna finish it. We're gonna finish the last one on part 3, and it's quite interesting to see someone. They have all been like trying to face it from like a evidential perspective, which they failed miserably. As someone, obviously, there will be few people that are there to share their testimony as their personal testimony that they met Jesus and it changed their life 360. And obviously, the best thing to point out to these people is that other religions claim the same thing. That's it. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Have a lovely one, people.